Call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kiwis love our oceans. Oceans cover 70% of our planet and represent 95% of the biosphere. And in New Zealand, our waters, they are particularly special. Members may not have noticed, but a few weeks back, the big Biodiversity Conference wrapped up in Nagoya, Japan. The Conference on Biological Diversity's 10th meeting received both brickbats and bouquets, and their delegates heard that we're in the midst of a great extinction event, where species are disappearing at a rate between 100 and possibly 10,000 times greater than the historical level. The biodiversity crisis is particularly important and it's global. It requires international solutions. We used to think when we looked at our oceans they were unlimited and it would be impossible for humans to fundamentally impact and change our oceans. However, climate change, ocean acidification, oil and mineral exploitation, whaling, overfishing and pollution are all taking its toll on our marine environment. A major recommendation from scientists at that conference is that some areas just need to be off limits to humans. In Nagoya, under the agreed protocol, governments have committed to protecting 17% of the land and 10% of the world's oceans by 2020. The 10% by 2020 protected area target sounds impressive, but it's something similar to something we've heard before in this Parliament. New Zealand, 10% by 2020? Pah, says the New Zealand government. We've already got a 10% by 2010 target. If you'd heard our delegates in Nagoya, you'd hear them say, hey, we're doing great, we're almost there. 7% of our territorial sea is in marine reserve. What they forgot to mention, of course, that what's counted isn't just the territorial sea, it's our marine area, our exclusive economic zone. A total area of 4.15 million hectares, which is less than close when we take into account only 0.3% is in marine reserves. Add in marine mammal sanctuaries, and our marine protected area is a paltry 0.77%, a long way off from the 10% by 2010 target. With 3 months to go till the deadline, how are we going? Do we have much chance of meeting that target? Not likely, considering this government has introduced a moratorium on marine reserves in the EEZ till 2013. Last year stopped DOC from applying for marine reserves, and in Akaroa declined a marine reserve application because of recreational fishing impacts. Why I mention this is to highlight the role of the Greens in this House, to be a voice for the environment, to talk about these sustainability issues, often ignored in the pursuit of profit. This bill, on the whole, ignores sustainability issues. Point of order, sir. I take offence at being called a...
Point of order, Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I take offence at being called a silly man by the member over there.
Oh. We're called many things in this House, and this is a debating chamber. I'm sure the member over time will hear other things.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I may be a silly man, but I'm not talking about silly issues, because this omnibus bill, it deals to the removing barriers to commercial aquaculture, just one aspect of how Kiwis interact with this ocean, how Kiwis interact for pleasure, for profit, for conservation. The message we're bringing to this House is we can't be looking at just aquaculture in isolation. We need some joined-up thinking. In New Zealand, we have some 5,800 hectares occupied, including freshwater farms and some 1,200 marine farms. Aquaculture can be good with the right species in the right place. However, it must be sustainable. We can't be establishing an aquaculture system which will just crash and burn. We heard from the Minister by 2020 it's estimated that aquaculture will make up 58% of worldwide seafood production. What the Minister didn't answer was why we're going to be doing that. What's happened to all the fish that are wild? What's happened to them? We've simply eaten them. Looking to the future of the aquaculture industry, we're hearing talk around $1 billion in earnings by 2025. The Aquaculture Council estimate this would require some 17,000 hectares of inshore mussel farms, or approximately 10 times that amount for offshore farms. We support ecologically sustainable aquaculture and we support economic development, but the Greens will be voting against this bill because we believe this bill was the marine equivalent of the 1991 Building Act, that's establishing, through lack of planning, through lack of regulations, huge problems downstream. The Minister quoted the FAO but forgot to also point out what the FAO says about the environmental impacts. The FAO points to pollution, eutrophication, transmission of diseases, displacing other activities like marine protected areas that comes from account from this bill. Between 1985 and 1995, and I know we're not talking about shrimp fisheries, we are talking about fin fish fisheries in this bill. 36 million tonnes of wild-caught fish was fed to produce only 7.2 million tonnes of shrimp. This bill is going to make it easier to farm fin fish in New Zealand, which is going to have massive impacts. Around the world, 31 million tonnes of wild-caught fish was fed to other fish. This is going to hugely impact our clean and green brand. Around the world, our fisheries have been called into doubt by The Guardian, by The Economist, by the New York Times. Even the Queen won't eat our orange roughy from New Zealand anymore. We need to be taking impact of sustainability issues. I want to now quickly go through some of our concerns with this bill, including the lost opportunities for spatial planning, to do with the Aquaculture Agency and the lack of local decision-making in the coastal plans. Firstly, looking at the spatial planning, there are many activities that occur in New Zealand's marine area: fishing, boating, water sports, enjoying conservation, and aquaculture shouldn't be seen in isolation. We need to be taking an integrated approach in this bill. The Green Party policy supports integrated marine ecosystem planning. According to the Environmental Defence Society and other experts, best practice is heading towards integrated marine spatial planning. This bill does not create a comprehensive integrated mechanism to replace the regional aquaculture management areas. The EDS submitted at the initial TAG report that the integrated spatial planning or a similar framework should be in place before we remove the red tape for accelerated commercial development. Looking to the Aquaculture Agency, we agree with the Environmental Defence Society's concern that vesting too many functions, such as representing industry interests, as well as responsibility for setting environmental standards, the drafting of national policy, and the management of environmental impacts of aquaculture are too many functions to put in one agency. The greater role of central government in aquaculture development creates potential conflicts of interest, whereby the regulator of the activity is also the advocate for the activity. This can lead to under-regulation and poor environmental outcomes. In a nutshell, it's not good policy or practice for the industry promoter to also be the regulator. Lastly, the bill follows poor legislative and democratic processes by directly amending the two regional coastal plans. It's a bit of a trend of this government, where they'll sack entire regional councils in Canterbury, where they'll change waterway plans like developed by the Greater Wellington Regional Council for Transmission Gully, where they'll call in giant motorway projects such as Waterview in Auckland and allow the community very little time to consult on it, or in the case of Mana, where they'll have no ability to know where the motorway is, where the route will not be announced before they have their most powerful democratic function, their power to deliver a message with their vote in the ballot box. This government won't even tell the voters of Mana where the motorway is going, whose houses will be bowled for this bill. When it comes to questions around local democratic involvement, this government errs on the sides of the corporate. It errs massively in their own interests for the government to ram through, much like we'll be doing under urgency again tonight, issues like this. This bill also follows poor legislative and democratic process, and that it changes the coastal plans to allow for the application for consents to develop fin fish farming, which have significantly different and more extensive environmental impacts than shellfish. It's not clear that if large-scale fin fish farming could be ecologically or economically sustainable in the medium to long term. This should be studied, and there should be local democratic input into these plan changes. In conclusion, the Select Committee stages will allow greater investigation, and despite voting against this bill, we look forward to engaging in the Select Committee approach. We hope this bill can be approved to better achieve its aims, but think the fundamental approach will make it difficult to be amended to the point where the Greens will support it. This bill is about making it easier and faster for corporate aquaculture to grow. We're not opposed to economic development and aquaculture in general, but it must be planned, it must be regulated, and there must be sustainability. Well, what we're doing here is like that other great folly in this House, replicating the 1991 Building Act, and we're going to see huge problems in our marine environment down the line. Kia ora, Mr. Speaker.